Hey, good to see you. Um, Everyone knows this what class this is. So we're going to begin uh, with some prayers. Sangye churang suki jangchu padu dagni kyapsu dagi chun chunen ki pe sognam ki drola panche sangye drupa sho. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly through the collections I create through listening to the Dharma. May I become a Buddha in order to benefit migrating beings. Sangye chodang soki chognam la jangchu badu dagni kyapsu chi dagi chunen gipe sognam ki rola penche sangye rupa sho. Through offering this ground anointed with perfume and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun and the moon, visualized as a Buddha realm, may all migrators enjoy a pure realm. O holy and perfect pure Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form the skies of your Dharmakaya wisdom, please send down a rain of vast and profound Dharma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam Guru Rana Mandalakam Niryatayami. Okay, Anna has joined us. We're going to begin with a little meditation as usual. So sit yourself up comfortably. Relax your body, relax your mind, let go of protests, parades, and place your attention and then subsequently your mindfulness on the breathing, the respiration. if you have a little success, bring your awareness, your alertness to your mental consciousness, kind of like withdrawing your sense consciousnesses, the airs that empower them, back to the heart chakra, like a tortoise turtle withdrawing its legs, and just concentrate on the mental consciousness via its contents until you can let go of those, of your feeding of the various mental events, feeding them by paying attention to them. You're going to withdraw your attention away from them. Just sense that clarity of the mind. But here, that clarity, that's a positive, but the Buddha nature that we're going to be investigating is the non-affirming negation, the lack of that clarity providing any obstruction to the arisal or reabsorption of mental events into the mental consciousness. We have that developmental Buddha nature. Which means we can improve, we can get better, we can get perfect. We can get rid of faults. And the fact that we can recognize this now and perhaps feel some encouragement, some happiness in this fact, that's due to this auspicious moment of having a life of leisure and endowment that we are currently experiencing, due to the accumulation of merit, mostly in our case, and wisdom in previous lives, especially practice of ethics and charity, the other perfections. The Buddha said on more than one occasion that this was an exceptional situation, an auspicious moment, in that we could use it to escape from cyclic existence, to achieve enlightenment. Whereas every other life in cyclic existence, other than those few instances when we began to try to think about the path, but petered out, we have a chance to leave imprints in the mind of realizations. We can make realizations of renunciation, bodhicitta, wisdom that realizes emptiness, that can bring about our own well-being. But as the Buddha reminded his sharper disciples not to be satisfied with his lesser vehicle teachings alone important, not to actualize those teachings in their own experience, but to know them and to practice them, to be able to teach to others, but to aim instead for perfect, complete Buddhahood, from which state one can effortlessly, like the turning of a water wheel, or turning of a potter's wheel that has been set in motion and effortlessly continues. The Buddha can effortlessly, spontaneously, without need of conceptualizing who needs what, and without fault, without any error, leads sentient beings from whatever state they are in now into the state of enlightenment. To achieve that state, we have to develop bodhicitta, as is said in the short succession yoga, for the sake of that enlightenment that can take sentient beings out of suffering and set them into stable bliss. I will develop bodhicitta, and upon developing bodhicitta, I will practice the bodhisattva's deeds, engaging bodhicitta. The main causes, let's say, subsidiary causes, conducive conditions, are the collections of merited wisdom to achieve Buddhahood. Once we've developed bodhicitta, so understanding that the text we're studying explains these collections, how to achieve them. I think I'm going to participate in the class for that purpose, in order to achieve enlightenment for the sake of sentient beings. Listening, contemplating, meditating. That's our motivation, that's our goal. I'm going to participate in order to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all mother sentient beings. Okay, thank you. So, how are we doing? Everyone okay? Different temperatures in different places. Jeremy is actually, it's getting even colder there, where it's getting in the 90s here, Jeremy, in the Northern Hemisphere. So I wanted to begin class today with a motivation that Geshe Sopa gave at Deer Park, July 10th, 2003, in the mornings. Usually in the mornings, he would give a motivation, and in the afternoon sessions during the summer courses, we would just say a few short prayers and then begin the discourse. But he would give he would quote from various sources. So here, Geshe said, I want to quote again from Shantideva. So this turns out to be verse 70 of chapter 7. So what's chapter 7 about, Don? Bodhisattva Charyavatara, you know?
I'm not sure I remember.
Easy way to remember. What's the 9th chapter about?
Wisdom.
And the 8th chapter would be?
Concentration.
7th chapter would be enthusiastic perseverance, or
effort, yeah.
virya, or zeal. So this is in that chapter. So you might wonder, well, anyway, so let me read this. So just for auspiciousness, I'll read the Tibetan once, but mostly in English. Jitar trakla tene tenchene dukni lula kyabgyurwa dejin lakni negyurpa, or in some translations, nepana nepe semla kyapargyur. Okay, what does that mean? So one way of translating is, just as a poison will pervade the body in dependence upon the blood, that's the word tak at the beginning, jitar takla tenche. Likewise, the mind will be pervaded by faults when an opportunity arises. That's one way that's translated. In the translation by Ellen Wallace and his wife, what's his wife's first name?
Vesna.
Vesna Wallace, I guess. Just as poison spreads throughout the body once it has reached the blood, so does a fault spread throughout the mind once it has reached a vulnerable spot. So that's their translation from the Sanskrit. They have the Tibetan and Sanskrit translations. One commentator wrote, before I get into Geshe-la's commentaries, just as the poison on the tip of an arrow, although small in quantity, can spread throughout the entire body because of the circulation of the blood, so too a seemingly small and insignificant thought or delusion can easily multiply until it permeates our entire mind. So that's kind of the sense of this. So Geshe-la had just elaborated a little bit on that. I'll read a little bit of what he said. For example, depending on the blood, it can pervade, a poison can pervade through the blood to the whole body, can be spread. Khap means to pervade or to spread everywhere. That can sometimes happen through the blood. In the same way, if you find a kind of opportunity, a situation, how did it's from the Sanskrit, they say when it's reached a vulnerable spot. So Geshe-la said, if you find a kind of opportunity, then all kinds of evil, negative minds can pervade within the mind. Sometimes our mind pervaded by certain kinds of mental delusions, right? And sometimes now anger or repulsion, many kinds of emotions might be pervading our minds these days due to the news and everything. Sometimes pervaded by attachment, sometimes hatred, sometimes jealousy, all kinds of faults. Once you have these pervading the mind, you lose control. So then your body, speech, and mind, your actions of body, speech, and mind also become faulty. So that is what's meant by the opportunity in one translation, or vulnerable spot. So you find yourself in a situation where these thoughts are present and so forth, and you're not watching your mind. You're not engaging with introspection and mindfulness, and these seemingly small things can begin to pervade the whole mind. For example, when attachment, hatred, and so forth dominate one's mind, if you are weak, if you don't have sort of like a divine kind of pride, what is the enthusiastic perseverance? What is it called, Paul or John? That's with Popa.
It's Sundru.
Sundru is enthusiastic perseverance in Tibetan, but the Pope Sundru.
What?
So I think that's sometimes called, it's not called divine pride, but it's sort of like confidence. So that you have, if your mind is weak and think, oh, I can't do anything, then you're not going to be able to attack these various kinds of faults. So that's why we're learning, Geshe-la said, studying what are the sources and how these various afflictions come, what their faults are, what they will do, what kind of negative effects. We learn these, and after learning and studying those things, then you have to fight against those delusions and not let any kind of opportunity or situation arise for them to rise and completely pervade one's own mind. So in this context, that section of the Bodhisattva Charyavatara is talking about that particular aspect of zeal or perseverance. So then he quoted another verse. This is verse 52 from the 7th chapter. So they're both midway to beyond half of the 7th chapter. Shiwe Chuldang Tegyurna Kayang Kading Taburchu Gelte Datni Nyamchungna Tungwa Chungduang Noparche. So what is the, does anyone know the Tibetan word for crow or raven? So it's ka.
Yeah, ka or ka. It's onomatopoetic.
Right. So here in this text it has kayan kading taburcho. So one translation has, when encountering a dying snake, even a crow acts like a Garuda. Right. So who you know who the Garudas are? The Garudas are mythological beings. Maybe the Tibetans identify it with some large birds that existed there that were the antagonists of the Nagas, the snake realm. And so they had sharp beak and big claws, and they could come down and grab the Nagas and so forth. So Garudas were very potent in that respect. But when encountering a dying snake, even a crow acts like a Garuda. So the crows come in or the ravens come in and grab the dying snake and take it, maybe fly a couple of feet into the air before they fall down again. So the text continues. When encountering a dying snake, even a crow acts like a Garuda. But I am weak. Even a small downfall, if I am weak, even a small downfall will harm, or even a small adversity will hurt. Wallace's translation was, even a crow behaves like a Garuda when attacking a dead water snake. So there they say dead, whereas the other's text is saying dying. So the snake is still slithering and the crows are getting excited. If my mind is weak, even a small adversity is troubling. So when crows encounter a dying snake, they act as if they were brave eagles or Garudas and attack it. Similarly, when our self-confidence deteriorates, a host of evils, non-virtues and faults will descend upon us like a flock of crows. Or what is it called? What's the word? A murder of...
murder of crows, yeah.
Murder of crows. I guess that's another. Have you heard, those of you who are literary buffs, is that the name of one of Edgar Allan Poe's books or short stories? Anyway, related like that. So Geshe-la said, that is, let's say ka, that it's a raven or small crow, cha kata. Here we have the crow or black crow, black little crow. The Garuda, on the other hand, is some kind of mythical bird, some kind of, enormous presence, who is mainly the antidote or antagonist of the Nagas, who carries the huge snakes. And in the middle of the carrying, holding in with his claws and legs everywhere, so the Garuda is easily controls the Nagas and the snakes. On the other hand, the crow doesn't have that kind of power. But if a crow finds a dead little snake or a dying snake, they make noise and flapping and do carrying in the sky like a Garuda. Looks like they're acting like a Garuda when the snake is already dead or dying. So it doesn't have much power, the crow. So like that, if oneself is weak from the point of delusions, that is to say, if you don't have antidotes to the delusions. If you're not inspecting your mind and trying to prevent them with antidotes as soon as they start to arise, they will rise. And if you don't act, if you're not able to act against them, but instead you fall under their sway, due to the fact that these delusions take power like that, that's a sign of weakness, a sign of not knowing things, being ignorance of what the antidote of those delusions are. So that is the special point here, Geshe-la said. That's one of the reasons that we're studying all of these various things, to understand the defects of the delusions, the antidotes to them, to recognize them when they rise, and so forth. For example, what makes more powerful, makes us able to control them, to not allow these kinds of wrong views, wrong behaviors, to prevent those delusions from dominating us. First thing is understanding, recognition, realization of the cause and effect, their own effect, and what they will do in the future. So understanding the defects of the afflictions and so forth, and the benefits of virtuous actions. Like I know some couple of you wrote to me to say that you were taking the Mahayana precepts on Sakadawa the other day. So that was a very positive, karma, rather than letting our minds sway in negativity. So for that purpose, we're studying, learning so many things. We have 84,000 mental delusions. We should try to subdue all of them. The great beings, spiritual beings, can easily clear small things, of course. Even big things they can fight against. So even beings who are not yet enlightened, but much higher than us, bodhisattvas on the bhumis and so forth, they still have some problems sometime, but they do, because of their knowledge, they're able to apply the antidotes, and so they don't fall into the situation like ourselves. Okay, so I wanted to share that with you for auspiciousness, as Geshe Zopa gave one of the most extensive teachings I received on Gompa Rapsel. Also with Geshe Jampa Gyatso at Institute of Lama Tsongkhapa, when we translated the Majjhimakavatara, Geshe-la gave mainly commentary on Majjhimakavatara, but through the Gompa Rapsel, but not in as much detail as Geshe Zopa did. Okay, so today we're starting from this section that is in Jinpa's text called Illustrating by Analogy How Effects Come into Being from Cessation of Actions. That's right, yeah. So that is, and I didn't put, I meant to put down the page numbers here. In Thupten Jinpa's book, who knows what page that is?
286, Venerable George.
286 for those of you who have the book. And in the FPMT, it's what,
159.
59. Okay, so you can find that. And if you're like me, I think Diana also has a digital text, although she'll be listening to this later, that you can find this section by looking for the words illustrating by analogy how effects come into being from cessation of actions. So when we talked about disintegratedness before, we gave some logical reasonings why, quoting from the sutras and the shastras, but essentially logical reasons why the cessation of something didn't mean that it was completely non-existent afterwards, that it could function as a functioning thing, shikpa. Now this is going to be some scriptural citation. So Jinpa's translation says, to illustrate the point above about how effects originate from disintegrated actions. We're on the same wavelength? Everyone understand what that means? KT? Okay. It reads, So here's verse 640, the 40th verse, 40th Karika in the Madhyamaka Avatara. Having experienced certain things in a dream, a fool may continue to lust for them even when awake. Likewise, even from actions ceased and lacking intrinsic existence, effects will come to be. Okay. So Venerable Joan translated for the FPMT very kindly. Having seen an observed object in a dream, she translates. So the Tibetan has, what is it? Milam Mikbeyul. So usually Mikbeyul is the referent objects or the observed object. That's so she's translating that literally that way. Having seen an observed object in a dream, even upon awakening, the foolish generate longing, maybe a little less controversial than lust. Likewise, also from actions that have ceased and do not inherently exist, there exist results, or results will occur. Okay. So one can take this in various ways. The commentary seems to take it about a particular way, about someone having a dream of embracing a man embracing a beautiful woman. But you could think of it also in many different ways. Within the dream, if you're enjoying something very much and you wake up and you like you were thinking of some delicious food that you were having. That happened to me recently. Having a sort of desire for that immediately upon waking and thinking, oh no, I don't have that. I didn't cook that yet. But here, the commentary begins in Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary. It says, having perceived certain things, such as a beautiful woman in a dream, a foolish man, and it says a fool, I guess it could be a woman also nowadays, a fool may continue to lust for them. Having perceived certain things, such as a beautiful woman in a dream, a fool may continue to lust for them. Things now ceased. What has ceased? What things are ceased?
What was seen in the dream?
Yeah, there's no longer what seemed so palpable a couple of minutes ago, beautiful woman, is now ceased. Things now ceased, even when he is awake, that is, even after having woken up. Likewise, even from karmic actions ceased and also lacking intrinsic existence, effects will come to be. This illustrates how effects can arise from karma following its disintegration. So this is not something new. This is just sort of an illustration or an analogy that you can kind of see in your own life. When you've had dreams, if you've awakened, sometimes men will have some kind of physical symptom when they awaken from some, sensual dream. So to substantiate the point of this analogy, Chandrakirti cites the Transference to Another Existence Sutra. So we have there, could you post that? Is it there? I don't see, where is it posted? Oh, that's the whole sutra. Okay, right, exactly. So there is a link there to the 84,000 website. And this is their translation. So there they translate it as the Sutra on Transmigration Through Existence, the Sipe Poe Do, or the Bhava Samkranta Bhava Sankranti Sutra. So I encountered this when we were translating the Madhyamaka Vatara. So having this link, you can check this later, many interesting details about the situation of this sutra. Let me read a little bit, just sort of background from what's called here can I make it bigger? There we go, the summary. So King Srenya Bimbasara. So usually we refer to King Bimbasara. Have you guys heard of King Bimbasara from the sutras? Very influential. He was one of the first ones that Shakyamuni went to when he was still a wandering mendicant and was given aid when Buddha came into his area because he was royalty and Bimbasara, identified. So usually he's not called Shrenya, but here it puts that name also. King Shrenya Bimbasara of Magadha approaches the Buddha and asks him how a past action can appear before the mind at the moment of death. The Buddha presents the analogy of a sleeping person who dreams of a beautiful woman and on waking foolishly longs to find her. He cites this as an example of how an action of the distant past, which has arisen from perception and subsequent afflictive emotions, and then subsequently ceased, how that can appear to the mind on the brink of death, on the brink of death. The Buddha goes on to explain how one transitions from the final moment of one life to the first moment of the next, right? We've talked about that before, that from the more detailed explanation, we would say the person goes into the bardo in between the last moment of one life and the next moment of the next. But here, not using the terminology of the bardo, just talking about ending one and going into the next. The Buddha concludes with a set of 7 verses that offer a succinct teaching on emptiness, focusing on the 2 truths. So I would suggest, if you have time, to read that, to read the translation. The quotations here encompass almost all, almost all of the sutra. Say, for instance, this first quotation that we're coming to now starts on verse 4. So let me read the first 3 verses from the 84,000 translation, so we have some background. So, homage to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Thus did I hear at one time, the Bhagavan was dwelling on Kalandaka Nivapa. So what does that mean? Does anyone know? What is Kalandaka Nivapa?
That's the squirrel's abode, isn't it?
Yeah. Sometimes Kalandapa also means crows. So supposedly King Bimbasara had in the bamboo grove, which is this other word there, at Venuvana. So Venuvana is the famous bamboo grove, which eventually became one of the gifts to Shakyamuni and the Sangha. And there's one, within that grove, there was one park called Kalandaka Nivapa, which is explained in the introduction above. But anyway, so this is where he is. He's in the bamboo grove in one particular park near Rajgriha, together with a great monastic sangha of 1,250 monks. So there were various number of monks mentioned as the sangha at various times as the sangha got bigger and bigger. Here the sangha is 1,250 bhikshus and a multitude of bodhisattva mahasattvas. The Bhagavan, they translate the Blessed One, surrounded and venerated by an audience of many hundreds of thousands, taught the Dharma. He expounded the wholesome conduct that is virtuous in the beginning, middle, and end, and that is excellent in meaning, excellent in words, distinctive, perfect, completely pure, and thoroughly refined. At that time, King Shrenya Bimbisara of Magadha set out from the great city of Rajgriha. With a great royal pomp and power, he arrived at Venuvana, the bamboo grove before the Bhagavan. He bowed his head to his feet of the Bhagavan, circumambulated him 3 times, and sat to one side. Okay, so that's sort of like a little preamble for us here. Okay, so Jimpa's translation begins here. Oh no, maybe this is. Yeah, so the answer, actually, his translation begins on verse 5. So there's another verse here. So seated to one side, King Shrena Bimbisara of Magadha inquired of the Bhagawan, Bhagawan, how does an action performed and accumulated, I mean, something you did before, right? That action, having ceased and ceased for a long time, manifest in the mind when the moment of death is imminent? This is his question to the Buddha. Since all formations are empty, how are actions not lost? You know, how can it continue? So it's like Alaya Vijnana or what? You know, he wasn't talking about Alaya Vijnana here, but just, you know, what he's asking, how are they not lost? The Bhagawan replied to King Shrena Bimbisara as follows. So that's where our text begins. O great king, it is thus. A man experiences a dream wherein he is making love to a beautiful woman. Were he to continue to think of that beautiful woman when waking from the dream, O great king, what would you think of this? Okay, we're going to take a quick poll here, straw poll. What would you think of this, class? Someone has dreamed of making love to a beautiful woman. Man has dreamed this. And when he awakes, he continues to think of her. What would you think of this? Any comments? Okay. You would, you know, you say, well, that makes sense. Maybe I've done something similar there for a couple of moments, but if someone continues for a long time, you would say they're not abiding in reality, right? So the text continues. Is this person who, having dreamed of making love to a beautiful woman, if that person continues to think of that beautiful woman even after waking from sleep, is that someone who has the character of a learned one? Okay. So Bhagavan, replied the king, Blessed One, this is not so. They're not a learned one. Bhagavan, if the beautiful woman of this dream does not exist, and if she cannot be observed, what possibility is there to experience her? Such a man will be someone who is depraved, depraved and desperate. So the note 538 just is making note. This is quoting from the Bhava Samkranti Sutra. So in the 84,000, there we go, 84,000 translation. Let me just read what that says in this section. Great King, it's like this. To give an analogy, a man has dreamed that he has cavorted with the most beautiful woman in the land. So that's something the other text left out, in the land, Yulgi woman. So it's not just a really beautiful woman, the most beautiful woman in the land, in the country. And then upon waking, he keeps recollecting that most beautiful woman in the land. What do you think, King? Does that most beautiful woman in the land from the dream exist? And the king replied, no, Blessed One, she does not. The Blessed One, Bhagavan, then said, Great King, Maharaja. That's what Great King is, right? Maharaja. Maharaja, what do you think? In that case, is that person who has been fixated on the most beautiful woman in the land, wise in nature? And the king replies, no, Bhagavan, he is not. Why is that? Bhagavan, the most beautiful woman in the land from the dream is entirely non-existent and cannot be observed, as there is no way he can cavort with her. That man is bound to be miserable and exhausted. Oh, that's sweet, isn't it? As there's no way that he can cavort with her. What is that? What is the Tibetan for the cavorting here or making love? John or Paul? Deyang Yongsu Chopala, Chopa Tagala, Chite. Okay. Anyway, making sense, this analogy?
Is it Ngun Shen? Is that what he's saying?
No, I think it's Yongsu Chopa.
Yongsu Juba, right?
So Yongsu Chopa can just mean completely enjoying, right, on one level, so that
Oh yeah, Ngun Shen, and he obsesses it.
yeah, so a cavorting or making love to in any way. Okay, so Lama Tsongkhapa's translation continues. Up to this, the sutra presents the analogy. The following presents how the analogy should be applied to this particular case, to the referent. Okay, so, O great king, again, Jimpa's translation, O great king, likewise, childish beings on the ordinary stage who are not endowed with learning, having seen forms with their eyes. Okay, so we're talking ordinary people. We're not talking about dreams right now. We're saying they having seen forms with their eyes. So how did those forms appear to them? They always,
They existed.
yeah, inherently existent. Thank you. So childish beings on the ordinary stage who are not endowed with learning, having seen forms with their eyes, manifestly cling to those forms. So that means they have strong clinging to them as inherently existent. They manifestly cling to forms that inspire pleasure in their minds. So I don't have the Tibetan of the manifestly cling. I think that's the Shenpa or Ngompa Shenpa, which literally could mean cling, but it's usually used in the sense of clinging to things as being inherently existent. So having seen forms with their eyes, they manifestly cling, or they grasp those to be inherently existent, those forms that inspire pleasure in their minds. Okay, that's what we do. We childish beings. And having clung to them, they engender attachment toward them. So what is that clinging right there? What is that, having clung to them? What is that clinging? They're not clinging to them as being simply attractive, but being inherently attractive, right? And as a result of that, with addition of inappropriate attention, not thinking about it the right way, they engender attachment toward them. Because between imagining something as pleasant and the arising of attachment, there has to be some inappropriate attention, because otherwise, if you paid attention to those pleasurable experiences with the right mind, that they're impermanent, that they're the nature of suffering and so forth, you wouldn't give rise to attachment. Are we following? And having clung to them, they engender attachment toward them. Being attached, they engage in acts with their body, speech, and mind, stemming from attachment, from aversion, and from delusion. So delusion is when we translate the three poisonous minds, here, timuk, It doesn't mean delusions in general. It means that kind of deluded ignorance. Having executed the karmic acts, having performed actions, the acts come to cease, right? Once you've created an action, it ceases. When these karmic acts have ceased, they do not reside in the east with the support. They do not abide in the west. They do not abide in the north and the south and the up and the down. They do not reside in the intermediate directions. So this is mainly in verse 1.8 in that sutra. From the 84,000 translation, it says, "Great king, Maharaja," the Bhagavan said, "childish and unlearned beings in the same way become fixated on pleasant forms that they see with their eyes. Having become fixated, they become delirious or desirous. I'm sorry, desirous, right? Desire, attachment arises. So always talking about this same kind of sequence that we've encountered before. It's because that we are assenting to the appearance of pleasurable things as being inherently existent, that can give rise to attachment. Just having pleasurable experiences is not bad. What's bad is when you don't attend to those in the right way, your mind fixates or strongly grasps them to be inherently existing the way that it appears, and that gives rise to attachment. Being desirous, they then become enamored. Being enamored leads them to commit actions stemming from passion, anger, and ignorance, which are conditioned by body, speech, and mind. The actions thus conditioned then cease. Having ceased, an action does not remain anywhere in the east or in the south or in the west or in the north. It does not remain above, below, or in the intermediate directions. So that's essentially what we have in Trungpa's translation. So what's the context here? So the original question of King Bimbisara was how an action that was done in the past and ceased, how it could manifest in your mind at the time of death. Why is that important? Why should that appear in your mind at the time of death, Stephen?
Well, I understand the time of death to be the most significant time in terms of where you are reborn. So if you were to have like a virtuous kind of thought at that time, you would have a propensity to be born well, and the opposite for a non-virtuous thought. So depending on what appears to your mind at the time of death, it affects your future.
Right. So if something unpleasant appears at that time, negative minds can rise. And like when we talk about the links of craving, grasping, and becoming, that can set forth your future rebirth. So that was what the king was getting at. So Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary continues. The phrase "not endowed with learning," we talked about earlier what it has said, childish beings on the ordinary stage who are not endowed with learning. Now, not endowed with learning here refers to not having the realization of suchness on the basis of having heard the teaching on suchness. So they haven't heard ordinary beings. These ordinary beings haven't heard the teaching of suchness, which we are privy to. We're, when you think of how rarely the Buddha taught in detail about these subjects, we should think of ourselves as being very fortunate there, so that we've actually heard these teachings. Not endowed with learning here refers to not having realization of suchness on the basis of having heard the teachings of suchness. Manifest clinging, this strong clinging, is clinging to self-existence. So that states it explicitly. So this is not just talking about clinging it as being attractive, but clinging to the forms, let's say, as being inherently attractive or truly existently attractive, self-existently attractive. As for the three karmic acts of body, speech, and mind stemming from attachment, these includes both virtuous and non-virtuous karmic acts. Oh, yeah? So stemming from attachment, there are three kinds of actions that can take place. You can create actions with your body. You can create actions with your speech. You can create actions with your mind, which include both virtuous and non-virtuous karmic acts. Who can think of a virtuous karmic act that you create that way? What do you think, David? So which way? What we're talking about? We're talking about they were clinging to some attractive thing as being inherently attractive, and as a result of that, developing attachment to it. And then as for the three karmic acts of body, speech, and mind stemming from attachment, that means as a result of attachment, we engage, when we talk about actions of body, speech, and mind, they're all motivated by some mental action, right? So the mental event that would be present in the mind would be attachment. How could those include both virtuous and non-virtuous acts? That's my question.
Attached to enlightenment, the Dharma.
You said,
So here it says, as a result of having this attachment to something that's attractive as being truly existent, attachment rises. And as for the three karmic acts of body, speech, and mind stemming from attachment, these include both virtuous and non-virtuous karmic acts. Okay, let's read further. Karmic acts stemming from aversion are non-virtuous. Okay, so if what came to your mind was what you're grasping is something to be inherently unattractive, right? Aversion and anger arises. Those kinds of actions of body, speech, and mind that arise from that are uniformly non-virtuous, while karmic acts stemming from delusion can accumulate both virtuous and non-virtuous karma. Why is that? Nadine? What are you thinking?
I can imagine a karmic act stemming from attachment. For example, if a mother loves her daughter very much and saves her life, then she's attached to her daughter, but she still accumulates virtue when she does heal or save her daughter.
I think,
But
I think that's a good example. Yeah, that's a good example. The first one that we left hanging there. So how karmic acts stemming from attachment can include both virtuous and non-virtuous actions. So many non-virtuous actions can occur, but like you say, that they're out of love or out of attachment for someone, we can cherish them and try to help. So we create some virtue that way. Okay, but so the third one is what I'm talking about. The karmic acts stemming from aversion are uniformly negative. How can the ones stemming from delusion, which means timuk or moha, which basically means ignorance, how can they accumulate both virtuous and non-virtuous action? John, do you have any idea?
I would, as Nadine said, it could be the base of motivation for some virtuous act like protecting a loved one, but that attachment itself could be informed by the idea that the attachment was based itself on the belief in the true existence of that person.
Yeah, that's more or less what we said before. But here we're talking about particularly actions that come about because of ignorance. So what does this ignorance mean when we say moha in this situation? We talk about the three poisonous minds. So this moha can include not knowing the laws of cause and effect. It's not exclusively grasping to inherent existence. It can be, ignorance about the Four Noble Truths and so forth. So, where did it say? Karmic acts stemming from aversion are non-virtuous, while karmic acts stemming from delusion can accumulate both virtuous and non-virtuous karma. So actions that are motivated by ignorance, especially the ignorance of inherent existence, they can be virtuous because all of the virtuous actions that we create now are contaminated virtue, right? They're contaminated by, let's say, by moha, by timug, by what he calls here delusion. Okay, the statement that karmic acts cease immediately after their execution. Remember, once the action is executed or completed, it ceases. That is on the conventional level, while the remainder of the sutra citation rejects cessation to exist by virtue of an essence or a nature. Okay, how are we doing? Following? Well, that's general. So next the sutra says, and now it's going to immediately go to another, the following verse, the immediate following verse from this sutra. Then at another time, when the person nears the time of death and the lifespan propelled by a karma that is commensurate with it becomes exhausted, and the last moment of consciousness ceases, then like the mind of a person waking up from sleep, turning to the beautiful woman he dreamed of, the person's mind will turn toward that karma. Okay, there's a need to unpack that a little. Then at another time, when the person nears the time of death, and as the lifespan propelled by a karma that is commensurate with it, what does that mean? The lifespan propelled. So generally when we say propelled here, it means throwing karma, right? So when you are thrown into an existence at the time of death, let's say, because of craving, grasping, and becoming at the time of death, one karma becomes empowered, and then the next moment after that, there's rebirth, right? Craving, grasping, and becoming. What's the next link after becoming of the 12 links? Stephen?
It's birth.
Birth, right? Or rebirth, yeah. So this is talking about that. So when you are reborn, the karma that threw you into that life as a human or an animal or a hell being, that throwing karma has a certain predetermined duration of lifespan. That's what's meant here. The lifespan propelled or propelled by the karma that is commensurate with it. So whatever karma threw you into that lifespan had a certain lifespan. When that becomes exhausted, and the last moment of when your life is coming to an end due to the exhaustion of that lifespan karma, although there can be other reasons, that's not the only reason you can die, but one of the reasons is that you exhaust the lifespan that you had thrown when you took rebirth. And at the last mode of consciousness ceases, then like the mind of a person waking up from sleep, turning to the beautiful woman he dreamed of. So like that, the person's mind will turn toward that karma, like the mind of a person waking up from sleep, turning to a beautiful woman he dreamed of. Do you see the analogy there? You have to think about it a little bit. What do you think, Louise?
Yeah, because when you wake up from your sleep, you think of you can if you remember your dreams, you'll think of that. The person. I understand. I don't know how to explain further.
Right. Okay. Good. So, does the woman the woman you were enamored with in the dream, did she come out? No. No. Uh, how did she arise in your mind after you arose from the dream state? So you could say there's a remembering consciousness, like sometimes just when you wake up, you kind of remember what you're dreaming. And if you're like me and you don't have a good memory, that sort of fades very quickly, but somehow that has transferred into your mind there in the same way that a karma can ripen, like once it ceases. Remember, we're talking about the shikpa in unfolding as without a necessary location. We could say that the shikpa, the disintegratedness of an action, is deposited upon the mere eye, or we could say that it's deposited on the mental consciousness, the temporary mental consciousness, and in addition, the subtlemost mental consciousness, right? So we're talking about a situation like that. So when the mind of the person waking up from sleep, so when we die, when the karma to live is exhausted and the last moment of consciousness ceases, then if we take that phrase out from the beginning, the person's mind will turn toward that karma. Okay, does that mean that we're talking about the last moment or the next moment after that?
It's written, it sounds like it's talking about the karma that tossed you in the first place in the last life.
Let me read that paragraph from the 84,000 translation. But at some other time, whenever it might be, when the moment of death is approaching and the karma concordant with one's fortune for this life is exhausted, another way of translating that, the final consciousness ceases. And this next karma, just like the most beautiful woman in the land for the person in the analogy of sleeping and waking from sleep, this next karma will manifest in the mind. So is this talking about?
That one sounds different.
Well,
that one sounds like the karma is the next life's karma is being generated.
Yeah, I think so. So remember when we talked about craving, grasping, and becoming? Craving and grasping are afflictions, right? What is becoming? Is that an affliction? Paul, do you remember? Is an action, right? So there are many formulations of the 12 links. So they say the first link and the seventh, eighth, and ninth links are all afflictions. The second link is it not the ninth? The second and the ninth, that means karmic formations and becoming, are actions. So that becoming is the ripening of that karma. so that it is not quite ripened yet into the next life, but it is in that, what do we call it, nascent state, potential state, empowered to give rebirth. Okay, let's read what Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary says. Having exhausted a karma that is commensurate, namely the karma that helps sustain the continuity in this life of the aggregates of the same kind. And when the last moment of consciousness of this present life comes to cease, then like the lustful man who after waking instantly thinks of the beautiful woman in his dream and turns his attention to her, the dying person's mind at the point of death turns toward the karma whose potency has been reactivated and is therefore likely to mature in the next life. That's talking about the link of becoming, right? This, however, is not an instance of remembering. So that karma that had ceased before now is manifesting as becoming at the time of death, not because you remembered it, but because of the fact that it has, from the Prasangika point of view, the shikpa, the disintegratedness of it is a functioning thing. And now it's ripening. It's ripening as the link of becoming. Not too bad, but I see most people look like you're like, what do you think, KT? It making any sense?
Yeah, I was thinking, so at the time of death, you had these thoughts which triggered a habitual propensity that sort of you passed into the next consciousness, or your consciousness ceased, but you triggered that karma to come along with you. Is
right, through craving and grasping, which are still conceptual minds, right? You are causing various karmic seeds to ripen. Some of them may be ready to ripen anyway, but the particular karma that is going to ripen as becoming at the time of death, that is what is actually ripening right now, right at that point. Okay, let's read a little bit further. We can go back. So Subtin Jimma's translations continues. Chandrakirti then goes on to cite the following. And again, that means in Madhyamaka he's quoting this sutra. So now this is the next verse. In this way, as the last moment of consciousness ceases, okay, the last moment of consciousness has not ceased yet, because that's with becoming, right? When it ceases, and the first moment of consciousness that is part of the next birth arises, if one is going to be born among the celestial beings, alternately, if one is going to be reborn among the hungry ghosts. So that is abbreviating a quotation. So in the 84,000 translation, it says, Great King, that is how, as the final consciousness ceases, there arises the first consciousness belonging to the next life, be that among the gods, humans, asuras, hell beings, animals, or pretas. So the list is not enormous there. Okay. We're going to take a break just in a couple of minutes. Thanks for reminding me, Luis. So this is talking about the juncture between the link of becoming and the link of birth or rebirth, right? So becoming is still of the previous life, right? The karma that you've exhausted for that life, the karma that you had to, the lifespan of that has exhausted. You're at the end of that life, that subtle mind anyway, is experiencing the ripening of some karma. So that sipa is a karma, that is an action. So that is what's called becoming. That means it's that karmic seed is empowered to, in the next moment, give rebirth. So when we talk about the bardo state, the intermediate state, that can mean the next moment being born in the bardo. But here in the sutra, it's not talking about the bardo. It's just talking about from that, whatever length of time it takes until you're reborn. That would be the next moment. That would be like waking up, right, from the sleep of the previous life, waking up from that and immediately experiencing the result of that. Making sense? Stephen, little bit nodding. I can't tell what Doris is thinking. Oh, yeah, Stephen, what do you think?
So, are we saying here that a rebirth in the intermediate state is similar or analogous to the rebirth into the new life?
Yeah.
It follows the same process.
Yeah. So from the common Sutra Tantra explanation, from the clear light mind of death, the subtlemost clear light mind of death, there is a reverse transition from clear light to what? Black appearance, to red increase, to white appearance, and then the bardo mind, the gross mind of the bardo state. The bardo being exists for some time. When the bardo being dies, has an intermediate, there sometimes the bardo being might have 7 lifetimes in the bardo, that there's a minor death in the bardo and again born as a bardo being. Leaving that aside, let's say after sometimes the bardo being finds a rebirth, then when that bardo being enters into the what do you call it? The sperm and egg ovum of a couple. If you were going to be born as a human, let's say, in the usual way, not in a petri dish or whatever, while the parents are engaged in sexual union, you enter into the mouth of one of them, come down and enter into the ovum, and at that point you have died from the intermediate state, and there will be the black appearance, red increase, white appearance, and then the very first gross mind of the human being in the embryo, right? We following? What do you think, Sean?
Well, I just read ahead slightly from where we were in the 84,000 to 1.12. It says, Great King, no phenomenon whatsoever transmigrates from this world to another world, yet
Right.
there are manifestations of death and birth.
Right.
If
So-
no phenomenon whatsoever transmigrates, how do we carry anything with us? I mean, what's the point of...
Well, what it means is there's no, the being of the previous life. You were Sean Coughlin in your previous life, and when you pass away and are reborn, Sean will not transmigrate to the next life. It's talking about gross things like that, your possessions and so forth. We'll come to that in a minute, okay? So that will be addressed in the following stanzas. So Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary through Jinpa's translation says, the cessation of the last moment of consciousness refers to that of this life, right? The emergence of the first moment of consciousness, that would mean the first moment of the consciousness of the next life, whether it be the bardo, or if you just ignore the bardo and you say you died and you're reborn, the first moment of consciousness of the next birth is indicated with the phrase among the celestial beings and so on. So you can be born as the gods, one of the gods, or as a human, or as an animal, a preta, a hell being, and so forth and so on. when it says the celestial gods, that it also includes the form, not only the gods of the desire realm, but the gods of the form and formless realms, right? Since the intermediate state, the bardo, does not represent any of the 6 realms of existence, is it? Is the bardo, when we talk about the 6 realms of existence, what we just enumerated there, right? Hells, pretas, animals, humans. Did I leave something out? Humans, gods. What's the 6th realm?
Asura.
Asuras, gods, devas and asuras and devas. So those 6 realms, do they comprise all of samsara? Well, apparently not, because the bardo being is not considered one of those realms, although you could impute a realm to it, because the bardo being's body will have the appearance of the realm which you are at that point about to be reborn into. If you're about to be born as a dog, you will have the shape of a small dog, and so forth and so on. Okay, so since the intermediate state does not represent any of the 6 realms of existence, the first moment of consciousness referred to here is that of the new birth. So whether you're born as a human or whatever, although an intermediate state exists between death and the next birth, the scriptures often do not mention it when speaking of karma and its effects. This is because the primary aim is to establish the causal connection between karma and its effects from the perspective of birth and death. Okay, that's more or less what we were just saying before. Okay, then finally, not finally, again, Chandrakirti then cites the following from the same sutra. So I'll just quickly read this and then we'll take a break and we'll talk about it afterwards. So the instant the first moment of consciousness ceases, so what would that first moment of consciousness be? That would be the next life, right? The moment that that ceases, the continuity of the mind will emerge commensurate with the fruitional effect, maturation effect that one will come to experience. O great king, Jimpa translates, O Maharaja, no phenomenon whatsoever is transferred from this world to the next. Yet there is the transition of death and what manifests as rebirth. Okay, sort of saying if you just talk about the death and the rebirth, there's going to be some gap. It might be a long time. It might be 7 weeks or something like that. So when one ends and the other begins, no phenomena whatsoever is transferred from this world to the next. Well, in one sense, you could talk in a very gross way, like it says in the teachings on death and impermanence. A king and a beggar die in exactly the same way. A king can't take any of his kingdom with him, his favorite wives or his crown or anything. And the beggar can't take their bowl or their shawl or anything. One can take it in that very gross way. No phenomena whatsoever is transferred. Or you could say, in a slightly more subtle way, the subtle Sean of this lifetime, or as I say, the Sean of the duration of this lifetime that we know he'll live to be 108, let's say. At that point, Sean no longer exists. So that Sean doesn't transmigrate to the next world. You could take it that way also, or maybe more subtle ways. So, O great king, no phenomenon whatsoever is transferred from this world to the next, yet there is the transition of death and what manifests as rebirth. O great king, Maharaja, here the cessation of the final moment of consciousness. So that was the final moment of, let's say, this life is Sean or whatever. The cessation of the final moment of consciousness is what is called transition of death. And the emergence of the first moment of consciousness is what is called birth. When he says transition of death, that's this poa, transference, transition of death. Maharaja, when the final moment of consciousness ceases, it does not go anywhere, right? When we're talking about cessation, remember when we're talking about when an action ceased or a consciousness ceases, it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't become non-existent. It exists as a functioning thing afterwards. When the final moment of consciousness ceases, it does not go anywhere. When the consciousness that is part of rebirth emerges, it does not come from anywhere. Why is this so? Or you say, how the heck can that happen? It is because they lack intrinsic existence. O Maharaja, the final moment of consciousness is empty of the final moment of consciousness. What is, when you say something is empty of itself, that's talking about emptiness. When we say rang tong, right, self-emptiness. Death, oh, Maharaja, the final moment of consciousness is empty of the final moment of consciousness. That means consciousness is empty of inherent existence. Death and transmigration, or death, or the, what did we translate it as? You know, the reemergence in another rebirth, transference, are empty of death and transmigration. Karma is empty of karma. The first moment of consciousness is empty of the first moment of consciousness. Birth is empty of birth, yet one observes that karmic acts do not corrode or are not lost. Okay, so think about that. Debate. We're going to take a little break. Grab some tea. There we go. So we're back. So making sense what we're talking about? King Bimbisara asking Buddha about, you know, essentially he's asking how it is that some karma will ripen at the time of death as becoming. How does that come about? Even the action ceased a long time ago. So this is getting into our discussion of disintegratedness, and also in sort of incidentally here talking about the process of taking rebirth then. So let's read, let me read what the 84,000 translation was of that section, just rather than reading Jimpa's translation again. Maharaja, so when it says great king, I'll say Maharaja. Maharaja, immediately after the first consciousness ceases, that means the consciousness of the life that is in the process of dying, immediately after that, there arises the mind stream concordant with one's fortune, along with the experiences of karmic fruition that manifest therein. So that means immediately, that's again, excluding the bardo, let's just say you're just taking another rebirth. So immediately there will be the mind of that being. So if you're born as a dog, you'll have a dog's mind. If you're born as a god of the desire realm, you'll have a desire realm god mind. If you're born due to immovable karma in the first concentration, you can actually be born there. That's not only a place, not only a state of mind you can attain through meditation, but you can be born there. Being born there, you have a mind of the first concentration. So a mind stream concordant with one's fortune, along with the experiences of karmic fruition that manifest therein. So that means along with having that mind stream, you'll have the karmic imprints of all of the karma, the experiencing karma that you will be experiencing that lifetime, being beautiful or being unattractive, being strong or weak or intelligent or whatever. Okay, so next verse says, Maharaja, the phenomenon, no phenomenon whatsoever transmigrates from this world to another world. Yet there are the manifestations of death and birth. Maharaja, the cessation of the final consciousness is known as death. Right? When we talk about what death is when the final clear light mind ceases. When we talk about the subtle explanation of the evolution like that, the final clear light mind ceases. As soon as it enters into the black near attainment, that is the moment of death, that transition between clear light and the reverse evolution of the states. Usually you go from, you know what I'm saying, the forward dissolution means that the earth element absorbs into the water element and you have the mirage-like appearance and so forth, all the way up to the white appearance, red increase, black near attainment, clear light. And then there's a reverse order of that from the clear light to the black near attainment, red increase of the next life. Maharaja, the cessation of the final consciousness is known as death. The arising of the first consciousness is known as birth. Great King, the moment the final consciousness ceases, it does not go anywhere. The moment the first consciousness pertaining to birth arises, it also does not come from anywhere. Why is that? It is because they are devoid of essential nature. This is the 84,000 translation. Maharaja, the final consciousness is empty of final consciousness. Transmigration after death is empty of transmigration after death. Action is empty of action. The first consciousness is empty of the first consciousness, and birth is empty of birth. Yet actions manifest without being lost. So Jimpa had said, acts do not corrode. So that's usually what we mean, that karma is never lost. Okay, Don, what do you think? You've been following this carefully, I can see.
I think it follows.
Okay, you had your hand up. I thought you had a question.
I'm sorry, I think I just left it up there.
Oh, your metaphorical hand. Yeah, your yellow hand up there. Okay, got it. Okay, how are we doing? Making sense? Okay, so now Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary on this verse from the Bhava Samkranti Sutra. So the sutra states, prior to connecting with existence via rebirth, connecting with existence via rebirth. Let's see, how did Venerable translate that? The sutra states, prior to connecting with existence via rebirth. I think Venerable Jones said, the results of previous actions that reconnect one to a birth existence. I think that's more precise. So the sutra states that prior to connecting with existence via rebirth, or the results of previous actions that reconnect one to a birth existence, experienced as happiness and suffering, are produced from the initial mind of birth, the continuum of the consciousness that experiences them. That's from Venerable Jones' translation. Or to just read Jimpa again. So the sutra states that prior to connecting with existence via rebirth, one experiences happiness or suffering as a result of past karma. So I'm not sure if Jimpa says prior to connecting with the existence via rebirth. prior to that, one experiences happiness or suffering as a result of past karma. Is that right? Paul, is that right?
I'm
Prior
trying
to connecting with existence. I'm reading Jimpa.
right.
After the quote ends. So the sutra states, prior to connecting with existence via rebirth, one experiences happiness or suffering as a result of past karma. I think he's put the prior in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Venerable Joan wrote, the results of previous actions. You could say prior actions. She put the prior there, that reconnect one to birth, to a birth existence. That birth existence itself, which is experienced as happy or suffering, are produced from the initial mind of birth. Okay, so I think Jimpa's it doesn't make sense to me unless I'm interpreting his translation in the wrong way. It says, so the sutra states, prior to connecting with existence via rebirth. That would mean while you're still in the previous life, right? One experiences happiness or suffering as a result of past karma. You're not experiencing the happiness and suffering of that past karma that is ripening and throwing you into the next life. That's not right, I don't think. Paul, would you agree?
Yes, I would agree with you, Venerable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the editor let that one slip by.
Yeah, and it is this lay, right? Moonlay.
Say again, John?
Just in the Jimpa Tibetan text, it is Moonlay. The
Moonlay.
prior,
Yeah, the effect,
Yeah.
Munlei Jebu, the effects of prior actions. Yeah.
Right. So the FPMT translation is more correct in that section there. So from the continuity of that consciousness that experiences these, birth emerges in the form of the first moment of consciousness of rebirth. The sutra also states how the two, transition of death and birth, or as Venerable Jones says, while death, transference, and birth exist in terms of conventions, they do not exist ultimately. Jimpa says, the sutra also states how the two, transition of death and birth. Transition of birth and death, although it has two words in it, is just one thing, right? So I think it's a little bit, he's obviously, when he's talking about two, he's talking about birth, death and birth. So the transition between the two, death and birth, exists on the conventional level and not on the ultimate level. And the reason stated for this is quote, because they lack intrinsic existence, because they are not inherently existent. Where what is being negated is qualified. What is being negated? When you say the word they lack intrinsic existence, something is being negated, right? You're negating intrinsic existence. What is being negated is qualified, a qualification that must be applied to the statements about how consciousness and so forth are empty of themselves. So Lama Khapa is explaining that when it says consciousness is empty of itself, that means it's empty of itself as being inherently existent and so forth. All of those examples. Now, when such statements are made, given that there is the risk that people might consider karma and its effects to be non-existent, because you're talking about there's no consciousness that's transferred and so forth and so on. In order to prevent the people from exaggerating and thinking that karma and its effects don't exist, the sutra states that karmic acts do not corrode or are not wasted, or as Venerable Joan wrote, due to there being doubt through considering actions or results to not exist when presented like this, that can arise in certain people's minds, the Buddha said that actions do not go to waste, rather than saying corrode. 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 Not sure. Okay. So making sense? What do you think? Now, let's see here. Okay. So that goes through in the 84,000 translation through verse 114. I'll just read their verse there. Great King, the final consciousness is empty. A final consciousness, transmigration after death, is empty of transmigration after death. Action is empty of action. The first consciousness is empty of the first consciousness, and birth is empty of birth, yet actions manifest without being lost. So then after that verse 14, there is another, well, very short 2 verses. Maharaja, this is 115, reading from the website of 84,000. Maharaja, great king, no sooner does the first consciousness pertaining to birth cease, as soon as that first consciousness pertaining to birth ceases, there arises without any interruption the mind stream in which the experiences of karmic fruition manifest. And he has a little note there, 43. Let's see what that says. The Sanskrit reads, great king, then Maharaja, when the first consciousness pertaining to birth has consecutively arisen, there arises without interruption the mind stream concordant with one's fortune, in which the experiences of the results of previous actions are perceived. Okay, more or less the same. And then after that, verse 116 says, thus spoke the Bhagavan. This is Sugata, using another epithet. Blessed One usually is what they translate as Bhagavan. Sugata is a Sanskrit. What is that in Tibetan? Does anyone know Sugata? Do you know, Nadine? No. Paul, you know.
Yeah, Deshek or Dewar Shekpa.
Dewar Shekpa. So we sometimes say that as one of the the epithets of the Buddha. So thus spoke the Bhagavan, the Sugata having spoken, the teacher further declared. So now these next 7 verses are what were mentioned earlier in the introduction, which we didn't read much of the introduction of the sutra. Essentially, we've read most of the sutra so far. Now these verses are of a different nature, and they're not talking about rebirth any longer. Before I read that, yeah, Stephen, you have a question.
Yeah, a quick question. What is the Taisho? Is that a catalog like the Tohoku?
Yeah,
it's mentioned in the
Taisho is the catalog of the Chinese canon.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, I wasn't following what you were asking. Yeah, so that you were noticing some comment where in Jimpa's translation or the 84,000 translation?
Well, note 44 in the 84,000.
Oh, okay, right. Okay, so let's go back there. So now these 7 verses are now, sometimes thought it was a different occasion. Sometimes it's not like a summary of the previous question of Kim Bimbasara and the Buddhist explanation about it, but it's talking about emptiness. So 117 says, all of these are mere names. They abide only as notions, or you could say imputations, right? Set apart from their verbal designations, what is designated does not exist. Or you could say, what is designated does not exist apart from their verbal designations, right? You can't find anything other than just the mere name. Then verse 18, by whatever names any phenomena are designated, they do not exist therein. This is the very nature of phenomena. Verse 19, the nature of name, when we talk that about phenomena, are imputed by thoughts and names, right? The nature of name is empty of name. In other words, when we say a bodhisattva is just a name, you might then think that the name inherently exists there. The nature of name is empty of name also. A name does not exist as a name inherently. All nameless phenomena have been designated by name. These phenomena do not exist. They originate from conceptual thought, right? Phenomena, we seem to perceive phenomena with our eyes, our ears, our nose, and so forth. And our minds give names to them or conceptualize them in some way, even if we don't have the naming facility. If we're a child or an animal that doesn't give names, still we have some concept. They originate from conceptual thought, both the names and the conceptions. The conceptual thought that conceptualizes them as empty also does not exist. Okay, really just negating everything, right? So even the conceptual thought that thinks of them as empty of inherent existence, that does not inherently exist. That's all good. Yeah, this is a nice summary of emptiness. Then the quote, the eye sees form, unquote, is said by one who observes correctly to the world with its perverse arrogance. This was taught as the relative truth, right? So note 46 says that ngachen. So the word he translated, or the committee that translated this, translated as arrogance, is the Tibetan ngachen, shortened of ngagel-chen. So ngagel is usually the Tibetan word for pride. What does that literally mean if you just broke up the syllables? Ngagel. Does anyone know? Doris, do you remember from Lorig or maybe Nadine?
Nga is I and Gyal is like a victory or something, isn't it?
Yeah, okay, short
Yeah.
for Gelpo, king. So I am king, There's someone in politics now that a little bit like, I think there's some protests today where there are no kings or no more kings. Anyway, okay. So it's just commenting on, so the translator's comment there on how he translated the word arrogance. So what we see with our eyes and so forth are just conventional truths, relative truths. So the verse 22 says, what the guide has made known. So the guide here is another epithet of Buddha. When we I think usually that in Sanskrit is natha. Sometimes we translate that as Lord or something like that. They're the guide. So when we do the the confession prayer called General Confession, Chishak, it starts out, or no, in preparation to that, when we do the continual purifications, there's a verse that we recite at the beginning, Tomba Chomdende Dejin Shekba Da Chompa Yang Dakba Zokbe Zangi, giving all the epithets of the Buddha. It starts with Tomba. Tomba means like the teacher or the guide, the natha. So what the guide has made known, what the Buddha has made known, that seeing comes from a conjunction the wise speak of as the grounds for designating ultimate truth. So what did he mean there? 47, note 47 says, meaning a combination of causes and conditions, such as the object, the I, and the consciousness. So then verse 23 says, the I does not see form, and the mind does not know phenomena. This is the supreme truth. The world does not fathom. So this is what we mentioned a couple times. I've asked Nadine, what is the best knowing? The best knowing or the best seeing? Not seeing is the best seeing. The I does not see form and the mind does not know phenomena. This is the supreme truth. So this is the best knowing, the best seeing. And then the final verse says, the Bhagavan, having spoken, then King Shrena Bimbasara of Magadha, who was asking all the questions, the Bodhisattvas and monks, and the world with its gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas rejoiced and praised the words of the Blessed One. So that's an ending that we see in many of the sutras, right? So, make sense? So this was, let's look at the title of this section that we just finished. This was called Illustrating by Analogy How Effects Come into Being from Cessation of Actions. So translated, it referred to, cited much of this sutra of Bhava Samkranti Sutra. How does he translate it? Transferring to another existent sutra, or various ways you can translate that. Okay, so now when we begin, we're gonna skip next week, right? There's no class next week, and then our last final 5 sessions before summer vacation will take place after that 1 week break. So we'll finish at the end of July sometime, I guess. So at that point, we're going to be starting this next section. So let's just introduce that so that during the break, if you're courageous, you can read ahead. So you have some kind of reason for doing that. So this is rejecting objections to this presentation. And this has 2 parts. The rejecting the objection that karmic acts will give forth infinite fruitional effects. So this was an objection that 1 or 2 of you students, ourselves in our classes of discussion, has said, I think Sean, well, what's to prevent the shikpa once it's finally ripened? What's to prevent it from giving other effects? So this is going to be rejecting that objection. And then rejecting the objection that we are contradicting scriptures that present alaya vijnana, foundation consciousness. So there, in that section, will come out what Chandrakirti and Nagarjuna understood to be the reason that Buddha taught foundation consciousness. So in the Lankavatara Sutra and other sutras, the Buddha talked about an alaya vijnana, a foundation consciousness, but he had an ulterior motive for teaching that because the disciples in question were not ready for the full-blown exposition of subtlemost meaning of emptiness. And this was an intermediate way of, for the time being, them being able to follow. So through the Chittamatra, of course, is different than the lower schools, the Vaibhashika and Sautrantika, that said that phenomena are truly existent. Chittamatra said that phenomena are not truly existent. So it was of the Mahayana, right? Is that right? Shanamatra says the phenomena are not truly existent. No, they say that there is a selflessness of phenomena that the lower schools don't say. They do say that some things, like the mind itself, is truly existent. So they're not the schools that say phenomena are not truly existent would be solely the Madhyamaka, the Svatantrika and the Prasangika, right? Right? I'm just checking here. Okay. So let's just read a little bit. So the first outline, rejecting of the objection that karmic acts will give forth the infinite fruitional effects. So they will, after they've matured, they'll mature again. So the root verse 641 says, while non-existent objects are equal in their unreality, those with eye disease, that has some medical name I don't remember off the top of my head here, off the tip of my tongue. While non-existent objects are equal in their unreality, those with eye disease perceive floating hairs, not the forms of just any non-existent thing. Know likewise that ripened acts do not bear fruit again. Okay, there's a lot to unpack in that verse. Venerable Joan translated that. Just as although similar in being non-existent objects, those with eye defects see the aspect of falling hair, but not the aspect of other things. Likewise, understand the ripened actions do not ripen again. So there's going to be a consequence of that. So what does that mean? Someone who has floaters, that eye defect, you could call it an eye disease, I guess. I don't know there's a way to eliminate floaters. Is there some kind of medicine you can take to get rid of floaters? I don't think so. Unless you suck out the fluid from the eye and inject some new fluid or something. So they see floating, they see what they think are falling hairs, right? It's the debris migrating in their fluid that appears to be to some as falling hairs. They don't see sons of barren women. They don't see sky flowers. They see only this appearance of falling hairs. Well, do those falling hairs exist? Famous Italian mudra, no, they don't exist, nor do the son of a barren woman or sky flower or the horn of a rabbit or horn of a donkey. Although that set of phenomena are equal in being non-existent, only one particular thing is seen, the appearance of falling hairs. Know likewise that ripened acts do not bear fruit again. Okay, so let's just read a little of the commentary to that. So there's a question. It's sort of like this is the rejecting the objection that karmic acts will give forth infinite fruitional results. So the questioner is thinking that if you prasangika are saying that shikpa, disintegratedness, is a functioning thing, it will continue to give fruitional effects. That's the basis here. So that person says, you assert that fruitional effects, maturation effects, emerge from karmic acts which have no intrinsic exhaustion. They haven't intrinsically ceased because they are not born by means of an intrinsic nature. If so, then fruitional effects, the maturation of karma, should similarly emerge from those karmic acts for which fruitional effects have already ripened. So say you murdered in your previous life, And after many, many lifetimes, maybe other results of that murder that you committed have been exhausted. At some point, you will experience the maturation of that karma, right? When that ripens, this person is saying, what's to prevent it from having additional fruitional effects? If so, then fruitional effects should similarly emerge from those karmic acts for which fruitional effects have already ripened. So if you were murdered in the next life after you committed murder in a previous life, say for instance, then you should have some other effects after that, it's saying. There will therefore be the fault of endless process. Make sense? So the Prasangika would reply, Chandrakirti would reply through Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary here, while non-existent objects are equal in their unreality, right? The floating hairs, the son of a barren woman, all of them are equal in their being unreal. Those with eye disease, as an example, perceive with their eyes non-existent forms such as floating hairs, but do not see the forms of just any non-existent thing, such as the horns of a donkey or the son of a barren woman. Know likewise that while they are equal in having no existence through intrinsic nature, while they're equal in being non-inherently existent, fruition takes place from karmic acts that have not yet ripened. Maturation or fruition occurs from karmic acts that have not yet ripened, and that already ripened acts do not bear fruit again. Okay, so that's where we'll begin after our break. Hello to Sean's doggy there. So how are we doing? Making sense? What do you think? Any questions? Don, looks like you have a question. No? Okay. Paul, anything? No? Bhava Sankranti Sutra. So if you have a chance to read the whole sutra, it's essentially, we've read most of the sutra in those citations from Chandrakirti that Lama Tsongkhapa quoted. KT, Anna, any questions? Stephen?
Just kind of wrapping my mind around this, the karma is empty of karma, yet the cessation of karma is an entity.
Okay, so we have to remember when it's coming here, phrases that we've heard before and were explained and we were comfortable with, but now when we're accosted with them again, they sound strange. Karma is empty of karma. What does that mean? It means karma is empty of being inherently existent. So when we talk about emptiness, remember we talk from the Prasangika point of view, emptiness is talking about what is called self-emptiness, rangtong. So an entity like karma or a vase, when we say that if a vase is empty of vase, it doesn't mean that a vase is not a vase. It means a vase is not an inherently existent vase. It's empty of its own inherent nature that appears to the mind due to the obstructions to omniscience. Okay. Yeah, Doris.
Thank you, Venerable. Just a reminder that there won't be discussion on Monday.
Right, thank you. Give me a break. Give you a break. So do note the links that were put there, or the link that was put there for the 84,000. And when we're doing our dedications, I just wanted to mention one of my dear friends and students and often benefactors requested, let me get rid of this here, requested prayers for the people in India that were killed. What was it, 290 people that were killed on the airplane crash, and the students in the hostel that was where the plane crashed into that. There were several nursing students that were killed there too. If you're ever traveling on a plane, please make note that the only person who escaped without being killed in the plane crash was seated in seat what? Does anyone know?
11C.
11A.
Oh, A,
11,
sorry.
11A. Yeah.
That big-
It was an exit row.
So if you, so that is an example, and I've understood that somehow people are angry in India that this one person survived. So that's the famous example from our teachings on karma, that unless you create the karma, there's no way you can experience the effect. So whatever group, the people who died in that plane, from the Buddhist perspective, all created some collective karma in the past. It might have been small. Might have been small. They all maybe rejoiced in some killing or participated in some killing. And one of those 291 people on the plane either didn't participate in that negative action or did participate, but at the end didn't complete the action. They felt regret about it, or, uncomfortable. And they are the one, I think I saw the pictures of that person video of him walking away. So it looked like he could have been more beat up after attending a New York City rave. He didn't look that injured. So somehow that's from our point of view, that's a manifestation of the teachings on karma. So as we dedicate our merits now, also for the calming of all of the really violent minds that are arising within the mind streams of people in both, all sections right now in the political world and so forth, try to dedicate our merits that this will ameliorate those disturbances, that people can reach some sort of state of equanimity again. So let's dedicate our virtues. Gewadi Nyurduta Lama Sangye Drubyone Droa Chikyang Malupa Dei Sala Kupasho Changchu Semcho Grimpoche Make Panam Ke Gyuchik Ke Panyampa Be Payang Gone Gong Tu Pelbar Sho. O peerless teacher, an assembly of children of the conquerors, Shravakas, Pratika Buddhas, Conqueror Losang, spiritual father, and your sons, together with your Gelugpa lineage, all the objects of refuge of the infinite realms, including all the other lineages and so forth, please bestow upon us here and now the virtue and goodness to accomplish this prayer, or the goodness that this prayer be accomplished in upholding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings, So that gets Tupten, part of the Lama Sopa Rinpoche's name, Tupten Sopa. In upholding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you, Lama Zopa, wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. Sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerges, while striving exclusively for the welfare of the conqueror's teachings, for the welfare of mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. At this I lost hope. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truths of the oceanic blessings of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the bodhisattvas, so due to those truths, those are facts that are conventionally truth. Due to those truths, may the smile of a new reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for us fortunate disciples. And then finally, you who are my eyes for viewing all the infinite scriptures, supreme gateways for the fortunate ones traveling to liberation, gateways that allow you to enter into those paths, engaging with skillful means, moved by mercy, illuminating spiritual friends. Please live long and stable lives. I make this request. And then, as requested, thinking of the people who died in that terrible air crash, 290 people, plus additional people within the hostel, the medical hostel that died. And of all of the individuals in the world today, the United States in particular, that are with very strongly held opinions, holding to their views as being inherently existent, giving rise to actions of body, speech, and mind that are negative and are immediately harmful to other beings and definitely harmful to the beings that are creating those negative karmas, who have been our mothers numberless times in the past. May they quickly come to understand the error of their thinking, calm their minds, become equanimous, and eventually quickly enter into the Buddhist path, especially the Mahayana. Okay, thank you very much. Any last thoughts before we finish? No class on, no discussion on Monday. We'll see you in 2 weeks from today. Take care.
Thank you, Venerable
Thank you,
George.
Venerable George.
All for coming. See you soon. Bye-bye.